Welcome to Malifaux University. 920, 10 Thunders Starter Box. If you're a player new to Malifaux, you may have received a great deal of information and advice about which faction is best for beginners, which master or keyword wins the most tournaments, and more. This information is largely opinionated and will change rapidly over time. So at Malifaux University, we still recommend you look at the basic lore of the game and factions available on the Wyrd website and follow the rule of cool. That is, whatever looks cool, feels cool, or makes you say, "Oh, cool," is the faction you should play, because you'll enjoy it the most, and that's ultimately the point of the game. Each faction has a starter box with 4 models. The soulstone cost of the individual models will vary, but the entire crew will add up to 25 soulstones, which is perfect for a small game. The starter box also contains a unique faction-themed fate deck, 10 scheme markers with the faction's logo, a measuring widget, and all the general upgrades available to your faction. Let's talk about each of these before we get to the models. This fate deck, while themed for the faction, is not the same as the regular faction fate deck you can purchase separately in the Wyrd store. This one is unique to the starter box, which is pretty cool. These are paper cards, which means they're not necessarily the most durable, and if they get wet, they will take damage. If you'd like to make them last, you can buy standard size card sleeves from your friendly local game store in a variety of colors and styles. Just keep in mind that once you sleeve your cards, you won't shuffle them like a regular deck of cards. You'll blend the halves of the deck from the side 5 to 7 times. If you shuffle them normally, you'll put creases in the sides of the sleeves and kinda wreck them. A cardstock sheet has 10 scheme markers and the measuring widget. Punch them out carefully so you don't tear the design. These scheme markers do not need to go on plastic bases. They're already 30mm across and ready for the table. You can use these with any crew in this faction you later decide to build. If you play against someone else with a crew in the same faction, you'll need to distinguish your scheme markers from his somehow, maybe by putting a coin on top of yours. The measuring widget is a fantastic tool that can stand in place of a measuring tape in most situations. It has 1, 2, 3, and 6-inch sides. If you place the tool between 2 models, it makes it easy to tell if they're within 1 or 2 inches for engagement. If you need to measure an odd number like 5 inches, just lay down the 3-inch side of the widget, then rock it around the 2-inch corner, like so. You'll also notice it has a 50mm cutout. This is a surrogate blast marker. If you're unfamiliar, some game effects have this symbol, and when it appears, a model might suffer blast damage. You determine that by placing a 50mm base over the area, usually in base contact with the original target model, and any models within the 50mm blast area are affected. You can use this widget to measure that 50mm diameter without having to place a 50mm base on the table. Watch video 209 for detailed instructions on how to handle blast markers and damage. In the plastic sleeve with all the model stat cards are the general upgrades allowable by your faction. You can add these to your models before the game when you're hiring your crew with certain restrictions. Each upgrade adds abilities, actions, or both, so you might want to hold off on using them when you're first starting out. Once you get the hang of your models as they are, then switch things up with an upgrade or 2. Later, when you're building other crews led by master models, you can still use these upgrades with other models in the same faction. Check out video 406 for detailed instructions on how to use upgrades. The models in the starter box are all pre-assembled. This means they are all molded at the factory and are each a single piece, so no assembly or other tools are required. The only thing you'll need to do is glue them onto their included bases. Check the base size on the bottom of the back of each stat card to make sure you put each model on the right base. You could use regular white glue, also called PVA glue, but you'll find it doesn't hold very well for long. Most players will use plastic glue to fuse the models to the bases, but this works only if it's plastic to plastic. If you create thematic bases out of cardstock, cork, wallpaper, or anything else, you'll probably have to use superglue. You'll be glad to discover that all 4 of these models stand on their own pretty well. Even Kara's paws fit entirely on her base. This means that a small dab of glue on the bottom of their feet is all you need, then hold them in place for a few seconds. Don't press hard or squeeze, and avoid repositioning the models if at all possible. Once they're in place, let them sit for 24 hours to make a solid weld. You see them here, already base-coated and ready to paint. Once you have the models on their bases, you could put them on the table and get right to playing. When you can, though, you'll want to paint them according to your own unique style and preference. You might feel like you're not very good at painting models, but it's a skill that takes practice, and there are no better models to start on than your starter box models. There are countless YouTube channels, live streams, and other resources available to teach you how to paint, so we won't repeat that information here. Here's one way you might paint your models, and here are a couple more ideas, thanks to Kalatika and Spilled Paint Pot. You can see more of their excellent work on Instagram and elsewhere. Now that we've explored everything else in the box, let's get to the models. The Sayuri Keyword models were introduced in the Madness of Malifaux rulebook, so refer to that book for the lore and stories that go along with this crew. All 4 models have the Sayuri Keyword, so as long as range, line of sight, and other rules are satisfied, any ability or action that refers to a friendly Sayuri model can be applied to any of them. Also take note that Koji received updates in the July 2023 errata. If your card for Koji doesn't say this on the back, you're working with an outdated card. You can always get the most current cards through the Malifaux Crew Builder app or from the resources page on the Wyrd website. Koji is the henchman who leads this crew. As a henchman, he is the only one of the Sayuri eligible to use Soul Stones. His first ability is Hard to Kill. This says that as long as he has 2 or more health, he cannot be reduced below 1 health. This is a very handy ability to have on your crew leader. Say you're playing against the Watchman from the Arcanist starter box, and Koji is down to 3 health, when Harris J5 hits him with a pendulum swing for 5 damage. Because of Hard to Kill, Koji would be reduced to 1 health and ignore the rest. Now that he's at 1 health, though, another hit will kill him. His next ability is the unique Leader of the Sayuri. This says that members of his crew with the Sayuri keyword treat enemy scheme markers within 6 inches of themselves as hazardous terrain. Instead of doing harm, though, this hazardous terrain gives the shielded +1 condition. Also, since this is an aura and the ability does not say other Sayuri models, it totally applies to Koji himself. By way of example, let's say Koji walks over to this enemy scheme marker and stands in base contact with it during his activation. By coming into contact with it, he gains shielded +1 as the effect of the hazardous terrain. Say he uses his Taker's Bane projectile attack, which we'll get to in a minute, while he's still touching the scheme marker. After he completes that attack, he'll gain shielded +1 again. If he completes his bonus action while still touching the scheme marker, he'll gain shielded +1 a 3rd time for a total of shielded +3. Be sure to watch video 204 on conditions so you know how to use shielded properly, and video 408 for all the rules about hazardous terrain. Also keep in mind that if Koji were to be killed, this ability goes with him. Other models get to use it only as long as Koji is still in play. Koji's 3rd ability is common to all the Sayuri models. Menacing says that while one Sayuri model is within 3 inches of another, since they all have it, enemy attack actions that target either of them have a negative modifier. Since your opponent cannot cheat fate when he has a negative modifier, this can result in many of these attacks failing outright, keeping the Sayuri models alive longer. Take note that this applies only to attack actions that specifically target these models. Blasts, pulses, and tactical actions that may affect these models would not suffer the negative modifier. The Partners in Crime ability takes effect at the start of Koji's activation, before he takes any actions. If there is another friendly model within 6 inches, whether it has the Sayuri keyword or not, that model may move up to 3 inches. It doesn't have to move, and it does not apply to Koji since it says another friendly model. If that other friendly model is Kara, the Sayuri Enforcer, she gains shielded +2. Lastly, Koji has the Protection Money ability, which a few other Ten Thunders models have. This lets him draw a card every time an enemy scheme marker is dropped within 6 inches of him. This can happen during his activation or another model's, and there is no limit to how many times he can use this ability. Just remember, you're not allowed to exceed your maximum hand size, which is usually 6 cards. If you wind up with more cards than you're allowed, just discard down to your maximum. On the back of his card, Koji has a machete, which gives him a 1-inch engagement range. When he successfully uses it, it can do 2, 3, or 5 points of damage, but has some italicized text as well. That says that he may remove a terrain marker within 1 inch of himself to gain a positive modifier to this attack. By terrain marker, it means any marker on the table that has any terrain characteristics like height, concealing, or hazardous, which means that, thanks to his Leader of the Sayuri ability, he could remove an enemy scheme marker with this attack as long as he's within 1 inch of it. Since removing hazardous terrain activates its effects, Koji could get shielded from an enemy scheme marker from walking up to it, as described earlier, then remove it with his machete attack, and get shielded +1 once the machete attack is complete, which is pretty cool. The machete has 2 triggers. If Koji gets a crow in the duel through flipping, cheating, or using a soulstone, he can declare the Maim trigger, which forces your opponent to discard a card. If he gets a tome, he can declare Survival Skills, which heals Koji. If you use this trigger, you'll flip another card and then heal Koji 1 for a weak card with a value of 1 to 5, 2 for a moderate card of value 6 to 10, and 3 for a severe card with a value of 11 to 13. The black joker will heal nothing, while the red joker will heal severe +1, which in this case is 4. Unless you flip the black joker, which cannot be cheated, you always have the option of cheating in a better card from your hand if you don't like the card you flipped. Koji has a projectile attack called Taker's Bane, which is the name of the pistol he keeps in his waistband. It has a 12-inch range and can target only enemy models. There are sometimes reasons when you might want to target your own models with attacks, but this can't be used for that. The italics also say that Taker's Bane ignores friendly Sayuri models when determining friendly fire. Simply put, if you target a model that is engaging or is engaged by another model, you have a negative modifier to the attack. This is friendly fire. Because of this text, if you try to shoot an enemy model that another Sayuri model is engaging or is engaged by, you can fire freely without penalty as long as you still have line of sight. If your attack succeeds, it will do 2, 3, or 4 points of damage. You then have the choice to drop an enemy scheme marker, meaning a scheme marker belonging to your opponent, anywhere within 3 inches of the targeted model. Taker's Bane has the My Loyal Servant trigger available if Koji gets a ram when he flips, cheats it in, or uses a soulstone in this duel. This trigger lets any model near the target of the attack, other than the targeted model or Koji, heal 1, 2, or 3, following the same process as the Survival Skills trigger from his machete. Koji's third attack action is also his bonus action, which means he can use it only once during his activation. Boryokudan has a 6-inch range, is resisted with willpower, and can target only an enemy model. This attack does a flat 3 damage, but then your opponent must make a choice. Your opponent can choose for Koji to drop 1 or 2 enemy scheme markers near the target, reducing the damage by 1 for each marker dropped. To be clear, let's look at an example. The Sayuri are in an encounter with the Arcanist Watchman, and it's Koji's activation. He declares the Boryokudan attack and targets Harrison Frodsham, who is 5 inches away and engaged with Kara. This attack doesn't specifically say it ignores friendly fire, like Taker's Bane, but Koji still doesn't have to worry about it because this is not a projectile attack with the little pistol next to it. He flips a 12 for a total of 18, while Harrison flips a 4, adding his willpower stat of 6 for a total of 10. Harrison doesn't cheat and loses the duel. The Watchman henchman doesn't want to take 3 damage, so agrees to let Koji drop 2 scheme markers. This reduces the damage he suffers to 1. Koji drops one of the Arcanist scheme markers under Kara, so she'll benefit from the Leader of the Sayuri ability and gain shielded during her activation. The other, Koji places just behind Harrison. Remember that this model always refers to the model whose card you're reading, and enemy and friendly are always from the perspective of this model. Koji's tactical action is called Hostile Takeover, and can take advantage of the scheme markers dropped by Taker's Bane and Boryokudan. This also has a 6-inch range and has a target number of 12 of masks. This means Koji must hit both a 12 and have a mask in his duel in order to succeed in this action. Note that the stat is 6 and has an embedded RAM. This RAM won't help him with his target number, but will guarantee the intimidation factor trigger if he wants it. So how do you get a mask in your target number? You can hope to flip it, but the sure way is to have a mask in your control hand of value 6 or more that you can cheat in since you have to flip anyway. Alternatively, you can spend a soul stone to put a mask on your flip, and then as long as it's value 6 or higher, you make it. The Amai models have a cool way of adding cards to your control hand we'll discuss later. Hostile Takeover can be used only once per activation and targets a scheme marker within the 6-inch range. This can be a friendly or an enemy scheme marker. Koji pushes the targeted marker up to 2 inches in any direction, drops one of his own 10 Thunders scheme markers into base contact with it once it's done moving, and then removes the scheme marker that he pushed. Let's go back to our Boryokudan example. Now that the enemy scheme markers are in place, Koji starts the Hostile Takeover action, targeting the second scheme marker he dropped. He flips a 10 of rams, hitting his target number, but not his suit. Not to fear, he cheats in a 7 of masks from his hand. He pushes the scheme marker towards this building, drops his own scheme marker next to it, and then removes the Arcanist scheme marker. Later he'll reveal this was to score a victory point. The intimidation factor trigger is helpful only when Koji is made part of a larger crew with non-Sayuri Keyword models. Since the stat for the action has a RAM built into it, the trigger is guaranteed if you want it, and it lets other members of Koji's crew who do not have the Sayuri keyword act like they have the menacing ability while they're within 3 inches of the specific 10 Thunder scheme marker that Koji dropped with this action. It also lets Sayuri models count that other model as one of them for their own menacing abilities. This effect doesn't apply to other scheme markers and doesn't move with the model if it moves away from the scheme marker. It also doesn't apply to a master model in your crew, which is different from your crew leader, since both masters and henchmen are eligible to be crew leaders. Kara the Panther is the enforcer of the Sayuri crew. Her first ability makes her harder to attack and messes with her opponent's control hand all at the same time. Feline Reflexes says that when she's targeted by an enemy attack action, she can use her movement stat of 6 to resist it unless her opponent discards a card first. Since the vast majority of attacks are resisted by defense or willpower, this will give Kara an edge in most cases. This also applies to each attack action, so if a Gearling, for instance, targets Kara twice with its Timekeeper's Tools attack, the Gearling will have to discard a card each time unless it wants to let Kara resist with movement instead of defense. This doesn't apply to tactical actions or game effects that do not specifically target Kara, like pulses, blasts, and auras. Like all Sayuri models, Kara has the menacing ability, as explained for Koji. She also has stealth, which means that Kara simply cannot be targeted by any enemy action outside of 6 inches. Terrifying Gaze is an aura effect that can cancel a model's action for the cost of a discard if it's not the activation of the model taking the action. Say the Sayuri are in an encounter with the Grim models from the Neverborn starter box. Hildegard uses her Take by the Hand bonus action on a nearby red cap to get close to Kara and gets the Wicked Waltz trigger, which lets that red cap take a melee attack. Since the red cap is within 6 inches of Kara, and she doesn't want to deal with the puppet's huge sickle, she discards a card when the red cap declares the action, making it automatically fail. Kara's last ability is Unimpeded, which says she is unaffected by severe terrain. Normally, severe terrain costs twice as much movement to cross as regular terrain. Kara can walk across severe terrain like regular terrain without penalty. If that terrain has other traits like hazardous, Kara would still be affected by those normally. On the back of her card, Kara has Deadly Claws, which give her a 1-inch engagement range. They do up to 5 damage, and if Kara flips or cheats in a ram during the duel, she can declare the Tear Off a Bite trigger, which then heals her too. If she hasn't suffered any damage, then the trigger does nothing extra for her. Play with Prey has a 6-inch range and comes with a free ram in its stat. Unlike most other attacks, Play with Prey is resisted by the target's movement stat. This can target only enemy models, and if successful, simply pushes them up to 4 inches in any direction. Just remember that pushes go in straight lines and stop when they hit other models or objects. The Gang Warfare trigger, which comes with the ram, lets Kara remove an enemy scheme marker that's within 2 inches of her. If there's not an enemy scheme marker nearby when she makes this attack, she can't use this trigger. If she removes one, she gets to use her Deadly Claws attack on the model she pushed, ignoring range as if she were within an inch of it. If Kara were to have an upgrade or other way of having another melee attack action, she could take that action against the target instead of Deadly Claws. Kara has no tactical actions, and her bonus action is called Pounce on Chest. It has a 4-inch range, and it is no coincidence that it's the same distance she can push a target with Play with Prey. This can be used only on enemy models, and they resist with their size, so smaller models will have a harder time resisting this attack. If she succeeds, Kara places herself into base contact with the target and gives it the Injured +1 condition that lowers the target's defense and movement stats by 1 until the end phase. Naturally, this would make it harder for that model to resist Play with Prey and Deadly Claws. If Kara gets a tome in the duel, she may declare the Drop It trigger, which forces the target to drop one of its scheme markers into base contact with itself, but within Kara's line of sight. Remember that Koji's Leader of the Sayuri ability makes that enemy scheme marker hazardous terrain for Kara that gives her shielded. A mask in her duel lets her declare Flash of Gold, forcing the opponent to reveal 2 random cards from his control hand. A good way to do this is for your opponent to let you draw 2 random cards from his hand, look at them, and then give them back. If Koji is within 6 inches of Kara, though, you can choose one of the 2 cards to be discarded instead. Take note that even though the card comes from your opponent's hand, it is Kara that is discarding the card. If discarding a card triggers some other game effect, it'll affect Kara, not her opponent. Let's see what this could look like all together. Kara is 5 inches away from this red cap model. She targets the little puppet with her Play with Prey attack and flips a 10 of crows for a total of 16. The red cap flips a 5 for a total of 10, loses the duel, and doesn't cheat. She pushes him this way, winding up just within 4 inches of her by this building. Since the Gang Warfare trigger is guaranteed, she removes the Neverborn scheme marker that was nearby, and then makes a Deadly Claws attack against the red cap. Cards are flipped, and in the end, the red cap suffers 3 damage. Kara then takes her bonus action, Pounce on Chest. The red cap is size 1 and flips a 5 to resist for a total of 6. Kara flips a 9 of tomes for a total of 12 and declares the Drop It trigger. She places herself into base contact with the red cap, gives it Injured +1, and forces it to drop a Neverborn scheme marker in her line of sight. Since the red cap is up against the building like this, it winds up dropping the marker partially underneath Kara. When Kara takes her second action, she uses Deadly Claws on the red cap and winds up killing the thing. Thanks to Koji's Leader of the Sayuri ability, Kara gains shielded +1 after the attack since she's touching the enemy scheme marker. The last models in the starter box are the Amai. They are 2 distinct models, but they have identical stats, abilities, and actions. You'll see that they have a hiring limit of 2, so even if you buy another starter box with 2 more Amai, you aren't allowed to have more than 2 in a crew at a time. Though it appears third on the card, the first ability you're going to use is Gamble. This takes effect only once in the whole game, during the start phase of turn 1. You get to take an enemy scheme marker, one belonging to your opponent, and drop it anywhere on the table that scheme markers are allowed to go. Naturally, this means you cannot put it inside impassable terrain or something like that, but you could put it under or in front of a couple of your models so they get shielded +1 as soon as they move through it, thanks to Koji's Leader of the Sayuri ability. Also, if you have both Amai in your crew at the beginning of the game, you get to do this for each of them, so that's 2 enemy scheme markers wherever you want. The first ability listed on the Amai's card is Confident Stance. This is an aura that affects enemy models. If an enemy model ends a charge action within 3 inches of the Amai, it suffers 2 damage. Remember that the charge is a push that generates an optional melee attack action. This means the model gets to complete its melee attack before Confident Stance does damage, and if the Amai is the target of the attack and is killed by it, then the enemy model won't suffer the damage because the Amai is no longer around. The Dependable ability has 2 effects, both of which require the Amai model to be in base contact with a scheme marker. If an enemy game effect, an ability, action, or trigger, would remove the scheme marker that the Amai is touching, the Amai can just cancel the removal. Second, when the Amai moves, which can be a push, a walk, or even a place, the Amai can choose one scheme marker it was touching before it moved and place that scheme marker in base contact with itself after it's done moving. The last ability is Menacing, which all Sayuri models have, as explained earlier. Let's see these abilities work together. This Amai is just under 3 inches away from Koji. This red cap charges past the Amai and attacks Koji with its huge sickle. Because the 2 Sayuri are within 3 inches of one another, the Menacing ability puts a negative modifier on the red cap's attack, and it fails. Once the attack is over, the Amai's Confident Stance ability does 2 damage to the little puppet, reduced to 1 for the red cap's armor ability. The Amai happens to be standing in contact with a 10 Thunders scheme marker. The red cap uses its Trail of Gore bonus action to remove it, which will allow it to use its huge sickle attack again. The Amai uses her Dependable ability to cancel the removal of this scheme marker. Since it didn't remove an enemy scheme marker, the red cap's bonus action then fails. The puppet concentrates to gain focused +1 and ends its activation. When the Amai activates, she chooses to walk away since she's not engaged by the red cap. She moves 5 inches, and her Dependable ability lets her place the scheme marker she was touching before she moved back into base contact with herself at her new location. On the back of the Amai's card, you'll see it has 3 attack actions. The sword gives it a 1-inch engagement range and comes with a stat 5. Simply enough, it does 2, 3, or 4 points of damage, but if you get a tome in the duel, you can declare the Oicho Kabu trigger, which lets you look at the top 3 cards of your own fate deck, rearrange them however you want, and then put them back. But if any of them are a 9, you have the option of revealing the 9s to your opponent to prove they are 9s, and then adding them to your control hand. You don't have to put them in your hand if you don't want your opponent to know what they are, and you're still not allowed to exceed your maximum hand size. If you add cards to your hand like this, and it puts you over, you'll have to discard down until you are back at the maximum, which is usually 6 cards. The Collier Pistol projectile attack has an impressive 12-inch range, also comes with a stat 5, and also does 2 to 4 damage. A mask in your duel provides the Thunderbox trigger, which lets you pretend that any scheme markers within 2 inches of your opponent are blast markers, and you don't have to remove them afterward. Blast markers do damage 1 tier lower than whatever the original attack does to any model they touch. Let's say this Amai fires his Collier pistol at the other red cap 10 inches away, over here by Klaus Norwood and this Neverborn scheme marker. He flips a 12 of masks for a total of 17, while the red cap gets a 5 for a total of 10. The puppet doesn't cheat and loses the duel. The Amai declares the Thunderbox trigger and flips a single card for damage. The 13 he flips gets severe damage of 4, which the red cap's armor reduces by 1 for 3 damage. The trigger lets him treat the scheme marker within 2 inches of the red cap as a blast marker, and since Klaus Norwood is touching it, he takes moderate damage. For this attack, that's 3 damage. The Amai's third attack is Threaten. This has an 8-inch range and is resisted by willpower. When you declare this attack, you choose a keyword. This could be Sayuri, since all these models have it, but later on, if you hire the Sayuri models into another crew like Jacob Lynch's Honeypot keyword crew, or Misaki Katanaka's Last Blossom keyword, you could choose that keyword instead. This attack does no damage to the target, but gives it the adversary condition for whichever keyword you selected. Until the end phase of the turn, any models with that keyword that attack the model with the adversary condition gain a positive modifier to their attack actions. Threaten has 2 trigger options depending on the suit of the card in the duel. A Crow gives Aggressive Warning, which does 2 damage to the target in addition to the adversary condition. A Tome triggers Drop It, just like Kara has on her Pounce on Chest bonus action. The Amai have 1 tactical action that is also their bonus action. Juggernaut doesn't require a duel and can just happen if you want it. You discard a card to pay the cost of the action, then you flip the top card of your fate deck and heal the Amai based on the strength of that card, as described for the survival skills trigger on Koji's Machete. Now that you understand how your models work together, practice playing a simplified game. This format also works very well in your friendly local game store for demo games. Set the table with a normal amount of terrain, as described in the core rulebook and also in video 301. Each player claims 1 standard deployment zone, which is an even strip across one side of the playing area, 8 inches from the table edge. It doesn't matter who goes first or sets their models on the table first, as long as no part of any model's base extends beyond the deployment zone. Watch all the videos in the 100 and 200 series so you have a grasp of the fundamentals before you play. Be sure to have corpse and scrap markers, as your models will likely drop one or the other of these when they are killed. Some models also use them for special effects. Lastly, you'll need pass tokens to either skip activating a model as the balance of the game shifts, or to pay for other special game effects depending on your crew. With that said, you'll play a full game of 5 turns, but with only 4 models in each crew, it won't take that long. You can play at just 25 soulstones, which will be all the models in your starter box, or you can play at 30 soulstones, which gives you a few extra for an upgrade or 2 and some soulstones left over for your soulstone pool. You might want to wait until your second or third game before adding in upgrades and soulstones, and for your first game, just focus on the abilities, actions, and basic game mechanics. You may also have learned that in games of a certain size, the crew leader gets to take 3 actions and a bonus action. That size is 50 soulstones. So at this 25 or 30 soulstone level, all models, even the crew leader, will take just 2 actions and a bonus action. Like regular games, there is no scoring victory points in turn 1. In turns 2 through 5, each player can score victory points in 2 ways: kill an enemy model, or place a scheme marker into base contact with a piece of terrain that is on the enemy half of the table. You'll have to remove the scheme marker to score the point, but in this simplified game, you can score as many victory points as you're eligible each turn. If you kill one enemy model anywhere on the table, and then remove 2 scheme markers that you had placed next to terrain on the enemy side of the table, then you'd score 3 victory points that turn. At the end of the 5th turn, count up all your victory points and see who won. Be sure to show good sportsmanship and shake hands with your opponent after your game. After a few beginning games like this, look into the Henchman Hardcore format in Gaining Grounds and take your game to the next level. That's the introduction to the 10 Thunders starter box. Pick up a printable set of all the markers and tokens you need to play Malifaux in the Wargames Vault. If you haven't already, join our Patreon for early, ad-free access to all new content. And be sure to visit the Malifaux University gift shop for the latest in Malifaux-themed shirts, hoodies, drinkware, and more. Links are in the notes below. And remember, play friendly games. Keep it simple and have fun.